Hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Christian Perspectives 2004 YouTube channel. My name is Jacob, and in today's video we are continuing the Why I Am Christian series. Today we are doing Why I Am a Christian and not a follower of Judaism. Now note, when I say Judaism, I'm not talking about Messianic Judaism, something that if you want to learn more about, look at my playlist for Messianic Judaism on the playlist tab on the channel. Rather, this is talking about mainstream Judaism, which is belief in only the Old Testament, and they are still in their minds waiting for the first coming of the Messiah, where we Christians believe that the Messiah has already come and we're waiting for him to come back again. So in today's video we are going to be talking about why I am Christian and not a follower of modern Judaism, and going to be going into a little bit of insight on why Jesus is indeed the fulfillment of all messianic prophecies from the Torah. So the first point, born of the seed of the woman. Here's the prophecy. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Genesis chapter 3 verse 15. This is fulfilled as we as Christians see this as the very first messianic prophecy. Jesus, born of a woman, the virgin birth, defeated sin itself and Satan at the cross, though he was wounded through his suffering and death. And next up, Jesus is a descendant of Abraham. Here's the prophecy. Through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed. Genesis chapter 22, verse 18. Fulfillment. Jesus is a descendant of Abraham and brings salvation not only to Israel, but to all the nations through faith in him. And if you want to get a good look at Jesus' genealogy, the Gospel of Matthew is like almost entire first page is dedicated to Jesus' genealogy, and it's only in the Gospel of Matthew that the entire genealogy of Jesus is listed to my recollection, and that's because Matthew was a Jew who had very good understanding of the Torah. And when I think of Jesus' parable now that I said that, when I think of Jesus' parable about the tax collector and the Pharisee, I kind of envision Matthew being the one praying, and Jesus talking about, the tax collector being the one to go on and have peace, where the Pharisee would not have that. If you know the parable, you know what I'm talking about. And if you know the history of the Apostle Matthew, then you would know what I mean by that. But figured I'd just do a little out loud thought there. Next up, the prophecy. The scepter will not depart from Judah until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Genesis chapter 49 verse 10. Fulfillment. Jesus is from the line of Judah, Matthew 1 genealogy, and is the rightful king who brings the nations under God's rule. The Passover lamb. Prophecy. In Exodus 12, Israel was commanded to sacrifice a spotless lamb, and its blood would save them from God's judgment. Fulfillment. Jesus is called the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. The Gospel of John chapter 1 verse 29. His sacrificial death fulfills the meaning of the Passover. His blood delivers from sin and death. So you can clearly see that these prophecies from the Torah, so Jesus is from the tribe of Judah. In fact, both Mary and Jesus' earthly father, Joseph, were both from the royal bloodline, both from the tribe of Judah, and Jesus being, Mary's son, and Joseph being his earthly father, showcases that Jesus is indeed from the tribe of Judah. And you even see in the Gospels itself, in all four Gospels, you see that point affirmed, so that way it's not just something that Matthew made up, it's actual historical biblical fact that Jesus is indeed from the line of Judah, as Mary was from the line of Judah, and Jesus' earthly father, Joseph, was from the tribe of Judah. And then you look at the Passover lamb. Think about it this way. God wanted the people of Israel, the people that would put their faith in Him, to sacrifice a lamb, to shed the blood of a lamb as a sacrifice for atonement of sin. Well, Jesus comes into the world as God in the flesh, lives the life we couldn't, dies the death we deserve, and since Jesus is God, through His death, the blood that He shed is eternal, offering eternal forgiveness for all those who put their faith in Him, therefore showcasing the fulfillment of the Torah's commandment of sacrificing lambs and other animals to receive forgiveness from God, which gives a little bit of insight as to why we Christians don't typically celebrate Passover, because we view it as being fulfilled through Jesus' death on the cross. And then the next point, the bronze serpent. Here's the prophecy. When the people of Israel sinned, God told Moses to lift up a bronze serpent, and anyone who looked at it would live. Numbers chapter 21, verses 8 through 9. Fulfillment. Jesus Himself refers to, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so too the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in Him. The Gospel of John, chapter 3, verses 14 through 15. Then you have born of a virgin, and I wanted to cover the more obscure messianic prophecies that some Christians may not know about. Some of them, when I was doing research, I didn't even know about. But now we're getting into the ones that you'll hear most typically when you hear a Christian-Jewish debate, and that is from Isaiah. And here's the prophecy. Therefore the Lord Himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. And this is fulfilled when Jesus was born of a virgin through Mary, as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 1, verses 22 through 23, and also recorded in the Gospel of Luke as well, and I believe it's also covered in the Gospel of John as well. Emmanuel means God with us. So this leads me to cover a certain thing that I wanted to cover in this video. Some Jews believe that the Messiah is not to be God in human form, but rather a very powerful king or prophet. So that is totally inaccurate, because the prophet Isaiah clearly affirms that the Messiah is the Lord our God entering creation, taking on a fleshly body. You have the prophecy of prepare the way for the Lord, talking about we now know to be John the Baptist. He prepared the way for the Lord. And then you have here that the Messiah shall be born of a virgin, and he shall be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. And God with us would not be just some powerful prophet or king. Rather, God with us would literally be God himself dwelling among us. Plus, again, I mentioned the part of the prophecy, prepare the way of the Lord. Again, all the biblical evidence and all early Jewish scholars, when asked about messianic prophecies, almost all of them agreed to an umpth degree that the Messiah is Yahweh entering creation and taking on a fleshly body. And you see that throughout the Torah. It's pretty clear. And if you are still in doubt about that, I would highly recommend you to read a Bible like the Tree of Life Bible, one that I will soon be reading, that better helps explain the connection of the fulfillment of messianic prophecies in the New Testament from the Old Testament. So, if you're a follower of mainstream Judaism, I highly encourage you to go and pick up a Tree of Life Bible, and I truly believe by you reading that, you will see the clear fulfillment by Jesus of the messianic prophecies from the Torah. Next up, the light to the nations. Here's the prophecy. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2. Fulfillment. Jesus is seen as the light, bringing salvation not just to Israel, but to all nations, recorded in the Gospel of John chapter 8, verse 12, and the Gospel of Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 through 16, directly quotes this. The child who is mighty God, prophecy, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. And this clearly points to Jesus' divinity and kingship, and being fully God and fully man, ruling with peace and justice. So this prophecy here from Isaiah points even more to the fact that the Messiah is Yahweh himself, entering into creation and taking on a fleshly body as the Son. So that's clear as day from the book of Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. And then you have the most famous one, the suffering servant. Here's the prophecy. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Isaiah 53, verse 5, fulfillment. We as Christians believe this describes Jesus' crucifixion. His suffering, life, and death brought forgiveness and healing for humanity's sin. So if there's any messianic prophecy that is clear as day, and that everyone, whether you accept Jesus or not, that you must accept was fulfilled, is this one. Jesus, we all know, even skeptics have agreed that Jesus was 100% crucified, clearly showcasing the fulfillment of the suffering servant. Jesus lived a suffering life. Now some may ask, how could Jesus live a suffering life? He had a sinless life. Well, think about it. We as sinners live suffering lives as is. But to live a sinless life with all the temptations in the world, that would be an even more suffering life. The burden that sat on Jesus' shoulders to fulfill every prophecy foretold about him, and then to ultimately be betrayed and crucified and be, broken and bloodied and half dead on the cross and ultimately dying on the cross for atonement of sin is clear evidence of the suffering servant prophecy being fulfilled from the book of Isaiah. So all of these messianic prophecies, and there are many, many more, these are just some of the more straightforward ones, along with a few obscure ones, but these are ultimately the reason why I am Christian and not a follower of mainstream Judaism, because all of the historical evidence backs up Jesus being reliable. Now I hear many arguments from Jews trying to discredit the Gospels, like I've heard Ben Shapiro say, well, they were written hundreds of years after the fact, but if you study basic history, you know that is a historical revisionist fallacy. That is a false teaching. The earliest manuscript evidence of the Gospels come from the late 1st century, when practically everyone that saw and knew Jesus was still alive, and plus there were writings like from Paul before the Gospels were written that affirmed Jesus' divinity, and people worshiping Jesus as God long before any pen to paper was put for the New Testament. And there are writings also outside of the New Testament that affirm Jesus' divinity, including a writing from, I believe it was like 90 or 93 AD, that affirms Jesus' divinity, along with many writings from Jewish and Roman historians that clearly point towards Jesus being divine and performing many, many miracles. And again, I brought up the Gospels were written in the late 1st century by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they are all historically reliable. They're dated back to the appropriate points in history. Those people were still alive in the late 1st century, and all of the evidence is overwhelming, including all of the evidence for Jesus' resurrection, because people aren't going to die for something they made up. People aren't going to die for something they don't believe in, but they saw the risen Christ, and all the apostles, with the exception of John, died for their faith in Jesus, and many other disciples that aren't even recorded died for their faith in Jesus, or were imprisoned for their faith in Jesus. Like, the evidence is overwhelming. The historical evidence, the archaeological evidence, the biblical evidence, it's all there. It's clear. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the living fulfillment of the Torah. And Jesus is God in the flesh. So to the Jewish people, the followers of mainstream Judaism, I love you. I do. But you are missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. You have most of the puzzle put together, but you're missing the crucial piece, the most important piece, the heart of the puzzle, the piece that brings salvation and true atonement for sin. You're missing Jesus. Put your faith in Jesus and follow Him. Thank you all for watching, and God bless.